This will come as no surprise to any of you, but I really like Wizardry. The mix of gothic and medieval fantasy, the tense resource management, the feeling of overcoming gauntlets of deadly enemies and mapping out dark, dank dungeon floors. Wizardry perfected the dungeon RPG over 40 years ago, and its formula remains relevant and enjoyable today. So, what about the Wizardry anime? Yep, that's right. For those who don't know, Wizardry got an official anime OVA film back in 1991. I watched it back when I did my giant retrospective on the series' history and legacy, but recently felt compelled to revisit it as someone who has a lot more experience with Wizardry now. What really stuck out to me about this most recent rewatch is just how much of a faithful adaptation of Wizardry it is. Now, I wouldn't call it a groundbreaking anime or anything, and think the games are still a better entry point into this series if you're curious about it, but it's a fun romp and I really want to talk about it. I'm not going to go through the entire plot or anything because I think you should watch it yourself, but I'm going to be going full spoilers on this and touching on all the references and Easter eggs and fun little touches that I think this anime gets right. So if you consider any of that spoilers, it might be worth watching it first. And that's pretty easy to do. It's less than an hour long and freely available with fan-made subtitles on YouTube and the Internet Archive. I'll have links to check it out down below. The Wizardry OVA was released in 1991. It was directed by Toshiya Shinohara, who's worked on a bunch of stuff, including several Lupin III and Inuyasha movies, and Gurren Lagann the movie The Lights in the Sky Are Stars. It was co-written by Kenji Kodama and Yu Terashima. It doesn't look like Terashima did much after this. However, Kodama went on to direct a bunch of stuff as well, including City Hunter, Detective Conan, and the Tales of the Abyss TV series adaptation, among others. Appropriately enough, the monster designs of the Wizardry OVA were handled by Jun Suemi, who did art for many of the Japanese Wizardry games, including the Nintendo Famicom, Super Famicom, and PlayStation versions, which were among some of the most popular ports of the game. The OVA's plot is pretty simple, which isn't surprising when you consider how simple the original game story is. In fact, it's basically the same as the core scenario of Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. The evil wizard Werdna steals Mad King Trebor's amulet and hides away in a labyrinth. Trebor offers a reward for any adventurers who find it, bringing mercenaries and mages from all over the country to the town of Lilgamen. The OVA makes it seem like it's been a while since this has happened, as most of the adventurers seem to have given up reaching Werdna, who resides deep at the 10th level of the dungeon, and instead opting to make their livings clearing out the monsters that make their way up to the upper levels of the dungeon and pilfering those floors for their riches. It does make one change to the storyline, however. Werdna is using the amulet for world-destroying reasons, and members of the main cast even have personal motivations for facing down the evil wizard. And it frames the quest a bit more like a virtuous mission,
commencing virtuous mission now,
than simply a high-paying, high-risk job that some freelance adventurers are taking on. I'm actually not entirely sure how I feel about that change, since in the original game, it's a little bit more ambiguous what the amulet's powers are and what Werdna's ultimate goal even is. I prefer some of the more ambiguous and grounded stakes of the video game version, but the anime still does a great job of selling this idea that there's a bunch of adventurers trying to make their living by hanging out and killing monsters in this dungeon. And I think that it does a really good job of fleshing out what is otherwise a very threadbare scenario that players mostly experience by reading the game's manual and then fleshing it all out in their imaginations. The group of adventurers we follow in this story are Shin, the fighter, Alex, who I'm pretty sure must have multi-class since he appears to be a fighter with some priest spells. Otherwise, this dude's a lord, which I kind of doubt for a couple reasons. The biggest being that the third member of the team is Hawkwind the ninja, and he is very clearly a ninja. Now, since the Wizardry series alignment system, at least the version that exists in the earlier games, makes it impossible to have ninjas, who have an evil alignment, in a party with lords, who have to have a good alignment, it seems unlikely that Alex is a lord. Don't worry, this is one of the only times I'm gonna nitpick the way the anime adapts the game mechanics. I don't really care if things are different, I just find it fun to speculate about the main character's classes since it's never outright stated except for a couple very specific instances. What we do know is that all three are experienced dungeoneers, and the OVA wastes no time in establishing this. The OVA opens with the trio fighting what appears to be a group of vampires in the labyrinth, giving us a taste of the action and violence that the OVA manages to fit into its 51-minute runtime. The monsters squirt green blood, heads and limbs are removed from bodies. It's pretty good 80s and 90s anime OVA stuff. After felling all their enemies, the trio open up a chest, with Hawkwind carefully unlocking the potentially trapped chest to reveal a giant trove of riches. The party then returns to Lilgamen when we get a glimpse of what the world outside of Lilgamen actually looks like. And here it's depicted in that really classic 80s and 90s anime look, with a barren, rocky wasteland that is just so nostalgic to me. Lilgamen itself seems to be a pretty large town, mostly built out of stone buildings, including Gilgamesh's Tavern, which gets plenty of screen time in the opening of this movie. While Alex, Shin, and Hawkwind are the core of the party, Wizardry fans will know that 3 characters is just half of your standard adventuring group. The team is soon joined by Joza, the wizard, and his apprentice Albert, who they meet shortly upon returning to the dungeon. Joza is a very interesting character. Not only is he much older than the rest of the team, he has actual personal stakes into wanting to face down Werdna. As he explains to the team, he actually fought alongside King Trebor and Werdna in various wars and other adventures throughout the lands, and now feels it's his responsibility to stop Werdna's evil plans. Shortly after, they're joined by Sheila, the elf. She's the sole survivor of her previous party, which were completely wiped out while looking for her lover Randy, who's become possessed by Werdna through the cursed Muramasa blade. I mean, look, there's a reason why samurai have to have high stats, and it sounds like Randy just wasn't up to the task. Sorry, dude. From there, the 6 of them team up and descend to the lower levels to take on the most frightening enemies in this dungeon and face down Werdna once and for all. The rest of the story is mostly just battle set pieces and other events while they explore the dungeon on their way to facing down Werdna. While the anime's plotline isn't much to write home about, let's be honest, neither was the game's. What really shines here is the characters and the action. And part of why these characters work so well is due to the absolutely stacked voice cast, which features some of the most prolific Japanese voice actors of the time, each with hundreds of roles across anime, video games, tokusatsu series, and Japanese dramas. Alex is voiced by Keiichi Namba, the voice actor for Axel Lowe in Guilty Gear and Bat from Fist of the North Star. Shin is played by Toshio Furukawa, the Japanese voice actor for Piccolo from Dragon Ball. Hawkwind's voice actor, Tessho Gendo, voices the many incarnations of Vandham in the Japanese versions of the Xenoblade Chronicles series. He also voices Chief Nakamura in Ghost in the Shell, Janemba in Dragon Ball Z, the Nine-Tailed Fox in Naruto, Teasel Bon in Mega Man Legends, Galerius in Unicorn Overlord, and Supreme Commander Bread in the recent Sandland game and anime series adaptation. Albert is played by Yoku Shioya, who voiced Cosmo in the Space Runway Ideon series and films, and recently voiced Archibald in Triangle Strategy and Dr. Albert Russell in Trails in the Sky First Chapter Remake. Sheila's voice actress, Keiko Toda, is best known for playing Aki Ross, the main character in Final Fantasy Spirits Within, Dan in Vampire Hunter D, and Osono in Kiki's Delivery Service. She also voiced Matilda Ajan in Mobile Suit Gundam, Kerala in Space Runway Ideon, and has had numerous roles in live-action Japanese films and TV series. The late Ichiro Nagai voiced Joza. You might recognize him as Left Hand from Vampire Hunter D, Mito from Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, Jiro Kichi from Detective Conan, Gramps in Tales of Zestria, Korin in Dragon Ball Z. He also voiced the evil Hargon in the Dragon Quest anime series from 1991, narrated the Record of Lodoss War OVA series and Mobile Suit Gundam movies, and in a fun bit of synergy, he also provided voices for the Japanese PC Engine port of the original Might and Magic, another seminal first-person dungeon-crawling RPG. And fittingly, the evil wizard Werdna is played by the late Kenji Utsumi. He was the voice of Rao in The Fist of the North Star, Colonel Volgin in Metal Gear Solid 3, Alex Louis Armstrong in Full Metal Alchemist, Zod in Berserk, Senbei Normaki in Dr. Slump, and voiced the magical dragon Shenron in all of Dragon Ball up until his passing in 2013. My favorite thing about this movie, though, is that it fits a bunch of gameplay mechanics like unlocking advanced classes, cursed weapons, checking treasure chests for traps, banishing undead, characters aging, affecting their stats, and rescuing and resurrecting dead characters, all within its 51-minute runtime, but it barely calls any attention to this stuff in a good way. In fact, it's all really quite subtle and natural. That's especially true of spells and magic. Maybe the character will say the name of the spell, but otherwise they just kind of happen. The fan subtitles do give some context and explanation to these spells for those who might not be aware of what they are, but otherwise it feels more like Easter eggs for fans rather than overt callouts and member berries. This keeps focus on the story, the animation, and the vibes, and it just makes it very watchable, including, I would guess, for new fans and people who have no familiarity with the series at all. Although, again, I do think that this is the type of thing that you can get the best enjoyment out of if you're already familiar with at least some of the Wizardry games, and in particular the first game. One thing the OVA definitely takes some liberties with is the action, but that comes down to more of Wizardry's limited presentation, especially back in the 80s and 90s, and the fact that it's adapting a turn-based battle system into cinematic action scenes. But man, do the action scenes rule. Fights feel grounded, even with Hawkwind being all acrobatic and doing cool backflips, and Joza and Albert and Sheila firing off arcs of electricity and fireballs and holy magic blasts. That stuff all occurs while still keeping that grounded and high-stakes feeling to the action. And much of that is thanks to, honestly, the violence. This thing is bloody. It's not any more than other OVAs of the era. In fact, it's probably much less so. But when it shows it, it doesn't hold back. There's actually an image from this movie that's become something of a meme, where they're saying that it looks like the party was ambushed, and the guys have like 5 swords in them each. One dude's eye is popping out. There's bits of meat and stuff coming out of another guy's face. And in the background, there's a dude just full-on crucified. If you've ever seen that image and wonder where it came from, it's from Wizardry. And honestly, it's absolutely appropriate. These games are notoriously difficult. You will often lose party members permanently, and characters meet their end in abrupt, violent ways, like falling into a trap, succumbing to poison, or getting cut down out of nowhere from an overpowered enemy. And the very few scenes of actual full-on blood and gore really make it clear that this dungeon is a dangerous place, and being an adventurer in this world is not a safe profession. I also just want to take a second and appreciate how this thing looks. You got that classic 4x3 presentation, the muffled audio hiss in the background, the low resolution and VHS artifacting. It's all super nostalgic. This is exactly what you want when you're watching a classic 1991 anime OVA. It also looks appropriately like Wizardry. Obviously, a lot of that is thanks to Jun Suemi's monster designs, but the characters themselves and the dungeon all feels appropriately like Wizardry, and it's got that grounded, dark fantasy vibe that is emblematic of Wizardry's visual identity. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up how this OVA is really something of a full circle moment for the series and Japanese fantasy in general. If you remember back to the Wizardry retrospective video, I talked a lot about how Wizardry, D&D, and other games like Rogue and Ultima influenced not just other video games and RPGs, but also fantasy-themed media in Japan in general. One of the biggest Japanese properties at the time that took inspiration from those early tabletop and video game role-playing games was the Record of Lodoss War. The Wizardry OVA dropped right at the height of Record of Lodoss War's popularity in Japan. The RPG Replay series had just wrapped up a couple years prior, the second novel series was halfway through its run, and the original Record of Lodoss War 13-episode OVA had just been released on video the year before, which makes a lot of sense when you look at the Wizardry OVA's visual design. There are so many similarities between Lodoss War and Wizardry. The barren landscapes, big shoulder pads and capes, long elfin ears, a love story between an elf woman and a human man, a more heroic stake to the dungeon crawling. It's just really interesting to see Wizardry taking influence from something that was originally influenced by Wizardry itself. And it also proves that Wizardry has a very important place in not just Japanese video game history, but fantasy and anime manga lineages as well. Stuff like Berserk, Delicious in Dungeon, Goblin Slayer, Frieren, and the recent Tower Dungeon all in some way can trace their lineages back to Wizardry. Whether this OVA or the original video games or other properties that took more overt inspiration from Wizardry. It really is hard to overstate just how important this old school classic kick your teeth in RPG is to Japan's entire media landscape. As for whether you should go and check this out, well, as I said at the beginning, you probably should have watched it before you watched this video because obviously I got into some spoilers, but there's still plenty here that I did not touch on. So whether you're a fan of Wizardry, dungeon crawling RPGs, or you just like dark fantasy OVAs, then you should absolutely give this one a shot. Anyway, that's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you for watching, and an extra huge thanks to all the Patreon supporters for making this possible. I'll see you in the next one.